Good morning. I have a question. If you are an educator in the room, would you raise your hand? So there are a number of us out there. If you're not so familiar with Pathways Commission, what it is, it began as a think tank to envision what the future of accounting higher education would be. That was phase one. That started 4 or 5 years ago. Time passes when you're having so much fun. And it's now into phase two, which is the implementation phase. So the good and the bad news is there's far more information in your book than I'm going to cover in 15 minutes. So hopefully there we go. See, I pointed at the screen, Steve. The two individuals that are responsible, that have the overarching responsibility, are the Bill Ezell and Mark Higgins. And so many of you know those two individuals. So if you see things you don't like, talk to them. If you see things you like, talk to me. There are a number of organizations, you see NASBA up there at the top of the screen, that have been involved in this process in different ways. And NASBA has been supportive throughout this venture that we're on. As I've looked at the recommendations, I've picked a couple that I thought might be of highest interest to the boards. So the first one that we're going to look at actually dovetails with a lot of the discussion today, which is how do we get more people into accounting to begin with? And so the ability to reach down into the high schools, as most of you know, high school students today either don't know what accounting is or what they think they know isn't true. So reaching down into the high school through using the advanced placement exam. Now, this is a slide that's basically given the status of the particular group that's looking at the advanced placement. Where we are status-wise is surveys have been sent out. A number of universities have said they would accept credit from advanced placement, and we're hopeful that that process will move forward. It's not without its detractors. So if you're not so familiar with this particular area, here is some data for you as to what has happened with advanced placement exams in other areas. An increasing number of students are taking advanced placement, and those of you who are educators know this. Many high school graduates start college with significant number of college credit hours that they've achieved while they were in high school. So if you look at that screen, the very last item there says students earning 3 to 5 on an exam. That's the grade you have to achieve in order for a university to accept it in place of your first accounting course. It varies by university what they take. But you can see the significant numbers of growth in students receiving advanced placement credit. Okay, there we go. Add to that the increasing number of high school students, and you start to see the need to get people interested in accounting earlier. That hopefully will have impact on the numbers of people taking the exam, the number of people coming into accounting, the number of people who would be sitting in this room one day. The impact to the boards, if there are a few boards I understand who address the first principles of accounting classes in their eligibility requirements for the CPA exam. If you're one of those boards, you need to pay close attention because you will have to decide what you're going to do about that. Are you going to accept the advanced placement in lieu of one of those required classes, or how you're going to handle that? I believe most boards start with the upper division classes. If you're a university, it can have significant impact, because if that advanced placement exam replaces one of our introductory accounting classes, that leaves us with the problem of, do we redesign the second course because students will only have 1 3-hour class, or 4-hour, depending on how your university is structured, before they start into intermediate accounting. So how do we deal with the rigor advancement so that students are prepared to be successful in the intermediate accounting class? Okay, I brought you one slide on diversity. You've already heard a lot about that. What Pathways has done is set that aside because there's other entities working on that in order to focus more closely on the higher education components. The other area I want to discuss with you is the one that relates to the actual actual curricula. And I know that has interest to all the boards because you're all dealing with what are the education requirements. So this has been an area that's received quite a bit of attention. It happens to be the one that I'm involved in. So the premise around the concept of curricula deals with, first of all, the vision is accounting because that's what we're about, right? It'd be rather silly if we were doing something else. But the core is the development of professional judgment. That's the mantra out there. We're hearing that and seeing that from a lot of the firms, and that's the core concept around the education. Pedagogy here, remember, pedagogy simply means the ways that we teach and learn. So what is unique about accounting education? What is unique about the pedagogy? And Pathways Commission sees that as interaction with the profession. That's an important aspect of that. As the profession is involved in education, it creates a better student, and then the graduates are better prepared to be successful in their careers. So that's the core of us. That's an awfully small slide, but you've got 3 task forces that are built around 3 different concepts. And the concepts deal with the knowledge aspect of education, the pedagogy, and then the technology. Let me go on to the next one. Here we go. This is better. So we have one task force that's dealing with what we call CBOC, or Common Body of Knowledge, that we expect all the graduates to have when they leave, regardless of their particular specialty. Another task force is dealing with that signature pedagogy and what that looks like. And then there's a third task force dealing with the technology, not only what we want students to learn, but also how it informs the educational process. The goal to all of this is really transforming the learning. Much has changed. The days of sitting in a classroom where you take notes while someone lectures are disappearing. And so there's all kinds of changes being experimented with it. Those of you who are in education know the term flipped classroom. The concept of a flipped classroom is that you acquire the knowledge externally, you come into the classroom and you apply it. We have blended classes, we have online, there's lots of issues about what's a valid class, how is it that students learn, and I believe your next speaker is going to speak directly to that with the neuroscience of learning. And core to all of this is that we learn and students learn better through active learning as opposed to sitting there taking notes. That's our task force. We have a charge, and this is the one that's working on the common body of knowledge. You'll see my name up there because I'm involved in this particular group. And there are Susan Walcott, some of you may be familiar with some of her writings, is the chair of this particular task force. So it gives you a little bit of what we've done. We've looked at a number of different competencies or curriculum models. We are in the process of further refining and defining these, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Here we go. We split it in 3 sections. We seem to be in 3s on this group. We have 3 task forces. We have 3 subdivisions. And those particular ones, here's our first one. I want to walk through those. The first component is foundational competencies, which means what can you actually do? What are you competent in? And so these are the things that, regardless of your field, we would want to see from our graduates. You're not going to see any surprises here. We want them to be able to communicate, orally and in writing. We want them to be able to deal with people, so there's a human aspect. We want them to be able to use quantitative methods. We want them to be analytical. We want them to problem solve. And we want them to be able to utilize technology to solve problems. So that's one of the major components. The other one deals with specifics to accounting. Again, I think most of you would come up with some of these same blocks. You might phrase them or split them slightly different. Whether it's external reporting or assurance or tax or information systems, you see one box up there called professional values, ethics, and attitudes. And when you think about this, think about the individual. And so this is the individual's values. And do they portray the professional values that we hold dear in our profession? Do they have the ability to make ethical decisions in situations of stress and ambiguity? So this relates to the individual aspect of ethics. The third area is the broad management, and you see ethics here as well. So here, think about ethics from the entity level. What is the culture inside the organization? What are the reward structures? What are the performance standards that encourage ethical behavior within the entity that someone works? And so these are the broader management competencies that we would look for. Now, each of these is a pretty high-level terminology and definition, so we then move into drilling down into deeper detail. And so I brought you one example, which is the planning, analysis, and control. So what we've done is we've defined the particular competency. So here's the use of accounting concepts and methods, et cetera. So we've got a definition. Underneath that, we have defined the elements of that competency so that if we were ultimately going to get this into the classroom and use it as a teaching guideline, it would tell us further what we are looking for. A couple of others within the elements competency. The second circle, if you will, dealt with the pedagogy. This is a different task force, and here you see their charge, and you see the individuals who are involved in developing this component of the educational process. Ultimately, this is to tie in to the common body of knowledge so that we have an integrative process that involves not only what you need to know, but how it's best learned and how it's best taught. So this is their actions of this particular task force. Professional judgment is becoming the mantra across all sort, both within the profession and in education. And the major firms all have frameworks. I have used some of these in my classes, and I found it just fascinating experience because the first time I tried it, it was extraordinarily difficult for students. And so, for example, EY has a number of cases in which a student has to make a decision, but when you read the case, they have different information from different people, and they have certain goals they're trying to meet. So we're trying to replicate that situation of complexity and ambiguity, but they have to ultimately reach a decision. Many students go into accounting because they like 1 + 1 = 2, and the further along they go in the education, the more they realize there is not so much specificity in the profession after all. So that professional judgment teaching is something we're all learning, and the profession is helping us do that. So when we speak of pedagogies, that's an academic term. This is really what we're looking for, this slide right here. So we've got a pervasive and routine educational experiences. Think about, if you're a lawyer, what law school looks like, and what the classrooms look like, and what the students experience. Think about what a medical school does, and how theirs distinguishes the medical school from other particular disciplines. So what is it about accounting that makes us unique? What is it about our education process that best prepares that graduate to enter the profession? That's part of what we're trying to do here. So public performances, meaning you have to get up and actually do something in front of other people, not just sit in a room or sit in a chair or sit behind a computer. The student accountabilities to others. We are accountable to others. This is, excuse me, I'm biased, but the CPA is like the highest and best level of accounting. I mean, that's my background, so I'm biased in that direction. And so we have the public practitioner, we as CPAs have a responsibility not just to the person sitting in front of us, not just to our employer, but to people that we will never see. And so that becomes an important aspect of the education if we're going to have a well-formed individual. Active and interactive, back to the active classroom. You know, how they work with each other, how they work with public, how they work with employers. And lastly, and this is one of the most interesting things to try to replicate in a classroom, which is experience what's called adaptive anxiety. You all know what that is. That's when your client needs something done, and there is a deadline, and you have different information, and lawyers, I'm going to offend the lawyers in the room. The attorney letter says basically, whatever is on this piece of paper is not my opinion, and I'm not giving you an answer. And this accountant is the one who actually decides what has to be done or what the conclusion is. So you're in a condition of complexity, you're in a condition of ambiguity, and that creates a lot of anxiety in that process. So what we're trying to do here is the concept of modeling that environment in a way that can help the student learn in a safe environment, in a safer environment before they get out into businesses and into public practice where the costs are much greater. I'm doing time. 2 minutes. Okay, so that's enough to wrap up here. We've envisioned this. Someone came up with the braid, and so that's what we're looking at the education side as a braid, which integrates the different components. Again, you've got the accounting competencies, the management competencies, the foundational, involved with the interaction in the profession. Accounting, as we all know, is a lifelong learning field, and this foundation, we would hope, would create the best person to enter the field and to become a practitioner and to become successful and one day to be sitting in this room. So with that, I will close. Thank you.